What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors gets pushed too far by a talk show host who thinks he can say whatever he wants? In just 43 seconds, a simple question turned into the most explosive moment in late-night television history. And it all came crashing down because one host forgot that respect goes both ways. The studio lights were bright that evening, and the audience was buzzing with excitement. Harrison Ford walked onto the set wearing his usual casual demeanor, jeans and a simple jacket. Nothing fancy. He gave a small wave to the crowd and took his seat on the famous red couch. The applause died down, and Graham Norton leaned back in his chair with that signature grin plastered across his face. "So, Harrison, wonderful to have you here," Graham said, clasping his hands together. "I have to say, you're looking quite weathered these days. Distinguished, some might call it." Harrison smiled politely, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Well, that's what happens when you live life instead of just talking about it." A few audience members laughed nervously. Graham's smile tightened, just a fraction. "Oh, someone's feeling feisty tonight. I love it when guests have a bit of fire in them. Makes for better television, doesn't it?" "I'm just here to talk about the film," Harrison replied evenly. "That's what we agreed on." Graham waved his hand dismissively. Yes, the film. We'll get to that. But first, I think everyone wants to know about the rumors. You know which ones I'm talking about." Harrison's jaw tensed slightly. "Actually, I don't. Why don't you enlighten me?" "Come on, don't be coy," Graham said, leaning forward with an exaggerated conspiratorial whisper that was clearly meant for the cameras. "The stories about you being difficult on set, the tantrums, the demands. I've heard you made 3 different assistants cry during the last production." The audience went quiet. Harrison sat perfectly, still for a moment, then spoke carefully. "That's completely false. I don't know where you heard that, but it's not true." Graham laughed, a sharp sound that echoed through the studio. "Oh, Harrison, everyone in this business knows you have quite the reputation. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. That's my job, isn't it? To ask the uncomfortable questions? There's a difference between asking tough questions and spreading lies," Harrison said, his voice low and controlled. "What you just said is defamatory." "Defamatory," Graham repeated, looking to the audience with wide eyes. "Did you hear that, folks? I'm being threatened with legal action already, and we're only 5 minutes into the interview." The audience gave an uncertain smattering of laughter, unsure whether they should find this funny or uncomfortable. Harrison shifted in his seat. "I didn't threaten anything. I'm simply stating a fact. You just accused me of making people cry and having tantrums. That's not true, and it's not okay to say." Graham's expression changed, becoming more pointed. "You know what I think? I think you're exactly as difficult as they say. You walk in here like you're doing us all a favor, like we should be grateful that the great Harrison Ford has graced us with his presence." "That's not what I think at all," Harrison said firmly. "I walked in here expecting a professional conversation about my work. Instead, you're attacking my character based on gossip." "Gossip?" Graham's voice rose. "I have sources, Harrison. Very reliable sources who have worked with you. They say you refuse to do more than one take, that you dismiss people's ideas, that you think you're above everyone else because you were in a couple of popular films decades ago." Harrison's face remained calm, but there was steel in his voice. "First of all, I've never refused to do multiple takes if the director asks for them. That's part of the job. Second, I listen to everyone on set because filmmaking is collaborative. And third, I've been doing this for over 40 years, and I've learned that respect is something you give to people, not something you withhold until they prove themselves to you." Graham smirked. How noble. "Tell me, does that respect extend to talk show hosts, or are we beneath you?" "I respect people who respect me," Harrison answered. "Right now, you're making that very difficult." "Oh, I'm sorry," Graham said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Am I hurting your feelings?" Should I be gentler with the big movie star? Maybe I should ask you only nice questions about how wonderful you are. Harrison took a slow breath. You can ask me anything you want. But what you're doing isn't asking questions. You're making accusations, and then mocking me when I defend myself. That's not an interview. That's an ambush. An ambush. Graham laughed again, louder this time. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison Ford thinks he's being ambushed because I dared to mention his reputation. This is the same man who has walked out of interviews before, who has famously told journalists to, and I quote, go away and leave him alone. Context matters, Harrison said. I've walked away from people who were harassing me or invading my privacy. That's different from what we're supposed to be doing here. Graham leaned back, crossing his legs. You know what I find fascinating? You're so concerned about your image, your reputation, your feelings. But what about everyone else? What about the people who work with you, who don't have the luxury of walking away? Who have to put up with your moods and your demands because you're the star? What demands? Harrison's voice was sharp now. Tell me specifically what I've demanded that was unreasonable. Graham waved vaguely. Oh, I don't know. Private trailers, specific food, control over script changes, the usual diva behavior. Private trailers are standard for lead actors. It's in the contract. Specific food means making sure there are options for dietary restrictions. And yes, sometimes I suggest script changes because I've been doing this long enough to know what works and what doesn't. None of that is unreasonable, and none of that is being a diva. Standard, he says. Graham turned to the audience with exaggerated disbelief. Everything is just standard. I suppose the 5 different types of sparkling water you require are also standard? Harrison's brow furrowed. I don't require 5 types of sparkling water. I don't even drink sparkling water regularly. Where are you getting this information? Oh, so now you're calling my sources liars? Graham leaned forward, his voice taking on a more aggressive edge. Interesting strategy. Attack the credibility of people who aren't here to defend themselves. You're the one making claims without evidence, Harrison pointed out, his patience clearly wearing thin. I'm simply asking you to be accurate. If you're going to accuse me of something, at least get the basic facts right. Graham waved his hand dismissively. Facts, schmacks. This is entertainment, Harrison. Lighten up. Can't you take a joke? A joke is funny, Harrison replied. What you're doing is spreading false information about me to millions of viewers. That's not a joke. That's damaging. Damaging? Graham laughed again, that same sharp sound. Your ego is what's damaged. You can't handle someone not treating you like royalty for once. Every other guest who sits on this couch knows how to have fun with it. They laugh, they joke back. They don't sit there looking offended by every little thing. Maybe those other guests weren't being accused of making people cry and being a diva, Harrison said evenly. Maybe they were actually having fun conversations instead of being attacked. Graham rolled his eyes dramatically. Attacked. Such a strong word. Has anyone ever told you that you're a bit overdramatic? Has anyone ever told you that you're unprofessional? Harrison shot back. The audience made a collective sound, a mixture of shock and excitement. This was getting real now. This wasn't scripted banter. This was genuine conflict. Graham's smile became more fixed, more forced. Unprofessional. That's a serious accusation, Harrison. Care to explain what you mean by that? I mean that a professional interviewer asks thoughtful questions, Harrison said. They do research. They come prepared with topics that will actually interest their audience. They don't just throw out random accusations and hope something sticks. Random accusations, Graham repeated slowly. Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it? Harrison asked. You've accused me of making assistants cry, of being difficult, of having tantrums, of being a diva. You haven't provided a single shred of evidence for any of it. That sounds pretty random to me. Graham's face was getting redder. You know what? Fine. You want specifics? I'll Give you specifics. I heard from someone who worked on your last film that you refused to come out of your trailer for an entire morning because the coffee wasn't the right temperature. Harrison stared at him. That never happened. Are you sure? Graham pressed. Are you absolutely certain? Because my source was very clear about it. I'm positive it never happened, Harrison said firmly. And I can prove it. We have production schedules, call sheets, witness statements. If I had refused to come out of my trailer for an entire morning, it would have cost the production thousands of dollars, and there would be documentation of it. So yes, I'm sure. Graham shifted uncomfortably. Well, maybe it wasn't a whole morning. Maybe it was an hour. It wasn't an hour either, Harrison said. It didn't happen at all. You're making things up. I am not making things up, Graham insisted, his voice rising. I'm telling you what I heard. Then you heard wrong, Harrison said. Or, someone lied to you. Either way, it's not true, and you're sitting here broadcasting it to millions of people. You see, this is what I mean, Graham said, gesturing at Harrison. You have an excuse for everything. You can't just admit that maybe, just maybe, you're not as pleasant to work with as you think you are. The audience was completely silent now. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harrison looked at Graham for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. Let me ask you something, Harrison said, his voice quiet but intense. What's the point of this? What are you trying to accomplish here? I'm trying to have an honest conversation, Graham replied. Something you seem incapable of having. An honest conversation? Harrison repeated. You've been dishonest from the moment I sat down. You've made up stories, exaggerated rumors, and when I've corrected you, you've accused me of making excuses. That's not honesty, Graham. That's a hit job. Hit job, Graham scoffed. Now who's being dramatic? I'm just asking questions. No, you're not, Harrison said, his voice getting stronger. Questions have question marks at the end. What you're doing is making statements, false statements, and then daring me to defend myself. That's not the same thing. Graham's eyes narrowed. You know what I think. I think you came on this show expecting everyone to fawn over you, to tell you how great you are, how talented, how wonderful. And when that didn't happen, when someone actually challenged you, you couldn't handle it. Challenge me all you want, Harrison said, but do it with facts. Do it with real questions. Don't sit there making things up and then act surprised when I call you out on it. I'm not making anything up. Graham's voice was loud now, echoing through the studio. Everything I've said tonight has been based on information from reliable sources. Then name them, Harrison challenged. If they're so reliable, if their information is so accurate, then tell me who they are. Let me face my accusers. Graham's mouth opened and closed. I told you, my sources are confidential. How convenient, Harrison said coldly. You get to say whatever you want, destroy someone's reputation, and then hide behind journalistic confidentiality. Except you're not a journalist, Graham. You're a talk show host. And this isn't journalism. This is gossip dressed up as entertainment. How dare you, Graham said, his face flushed. I've built my career on these interviews. I've talked to some of the biggest names in the world, and you have the audacity to sit there and tell me I don't know what I'm doing? I'm telling you that what you're doing right now is wrong, Harrison said. I don't care how many interviews you've done or how big your show is. Wrong is wrong. Graham stood up abruptly, pointing at Harrison. You know what your real problem is? You're old. You're from a different era, when celebrities could control their image and everyone had to play nice. But that world doesn't exist anymore. Now we ask tough questions. Now we hold people accountable. Accountable for what? Harrison asked, still seated, looking up at Graham calmly. What exactly do you think I need to be held accountable for? For your behavior, Graham shouted. For the way you've treated people over the years. for thinking you're better than everyone else. I don't think I'm better than everyone else, Harrison said, slowly, deliberately. But I do think I deserve better than this. And so does your audience. They came here tonight expecting entertainment, and instead you're using your platform to bully someone. Is that really what you want your legacy to be? Graham's hands were shaking now, whether from anger or something else. It was hard to tell. My legacy is fine. Thank you very much. I don't need career advice from someone whose best days are behind him. There it is, Harrison said softly. The real issue. This isn't about anything I've actually done. This is about you needing to take someone down to make yourself feel bigger. That's not true, Graham protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Harrison pressed. Think about it, Graham. You invited me here. You could have asked me about the film, about my career, about anything meaningful. But instead, from the very first moment, you've been trying to provoke me, trying to get a reaction. Why? What does that say about you? Graham sat back down heavily. It says I'm doing my job. If this is your job, then maybe you should find a new one, Harrison said. I came here tonight as a guest, Harrison said quietly. That means you invited me. You asked me to be here. And from the moment I sat down, you've done nothing but insult me, accuse me of things that aren't true, and try to humiliate me in front of your audience and your cameras. Why? What did I do to you? Graham's smile never wavered. You didn't do anything to me personally, Harrison. I'm just doing my job. This is entertainment. People tune in to see drama, to see celebrities squirm a little. It's not personal. It feels pretty personal, Harrison said. And if this is your idea of entertainment, then we have very different values. Oh, here we go, Graham said, rolling his eyes. The moral high ground speech. Look, everyone, Harrison Ford is better than us because he doesn't find this entertaining. He's above such petty things. I never said I was better than anyone, Harrison replied. But I do think there's a way to have interesting conversations without tearing people down. You can ask challenging questions without being cruel. Graham laughed sharply. Cruel? You think I'm being cruel? This is nothing. You should see some of the interviews I've done. I've had guests who could take a joke, who could roll with the punches, who didn't sit there looking wounded every time I said something slightly provocative. There's a difference between a joke and an attack, Harrison said. You told your audience that I make assistants cry, that I'm difficult, that I'm a diva. Those aren't jokes. Those are character assassinations disguised as humor. Graham's expression hardened. You know what your problem is, Harrison. You can't handle not being in control. You're used to being on movie sets where everyone does what you say, where you're the big important actor and everyone else exists to serve your vision. But this is my show, my set, my rules. And if you don't like the way I conduct my interviews, then maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on. Harrison stood up. The movement was sudden enough that it caught everyone off guard. The audience gasped. Graham's eyes widened slightly, though he tried to maintain his composure. You're right about one thing, Harrison said, his voice steady and clear. This is your show, and you're welcome to run it however you want. But I don't have to sit here and participate in whatever this is. Graham recovered quickly, that smirk returning to his face. Oh, fantastic. The dramatic exit. How very Hollywood of you. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison Ford is leaving because he can't handle a few simple questions. Harrison unclipped his microphone and set it carefully on the arm of the couch. They weren't questions, Graham. They were attacks. And I've spent enough years in this business to know the difference. This is pathetic, Graham said, his voice rising. You're proving every single thing I said about you. You're difficult. You're thin-skinned. You can't take criticism. You think you're too good to be here. Harrison paused and turned back to face Graham. The camera caught the moment perfectly, the two men staring at each other across the studio. When Harrison spoke, his voice was calm but firm. I don't think I'm too good to be here. I think I'm too old to waste my time with someone who confuses cruelty with charisma. You invited me onto your show, and I accepted in good faith. I thought we were going to have a conversation. Instead, you've spent the entire time trying to make me look bad so you could look clever. That's not entertainment, Graham. That's just sad. Graham stood up as well, his face flushed. Don't you dare lecture me about entertainment. I've been doing this for years. I've interviewed hundreds of people. And you know what? The only ones who ever had a problem with my style were the ones who were hiding something. So what are you hiding, Harrison? What are you so afraid of people finding out? I'm not hiding anything, Harrison said. But I'm also not going to stand here and defend myself against accusations you pulled out of thin air. If you had real questions about my work, about the film, about anything substantive, I would have been happy to answer them. But this, he gestured around the studio. This isn't journalism. This isn't even entertainment. It's just mean-spirited. Graham's laugh was bitter. Mean-spirited? That's rich coming from someone with your reputation. What reputation? Harrison's voice finally showed real anger. You keep saying that, but you won't give me specifics. Who are these sources? What exactly did they say? When did these incidents supposedly happen? You won't answer any of that because you can't. Because it's not real. It's all real, Graham insisted. Just because you don't want to face it doesn't make it untrue. Then prove it, Harrison challenged. Right now. Tell me one specific, verifiable incident. One person who will go on record saying I mistreated them. One actual example instead of vague insinuations. Graham opened his mouth, then closed it. The audience waited. The cameras captured every second of the silence. Finally, Graham spoke, his voice defensive. I don't have to prove anything to you. My sources are confidential. Convenient, Harrison said. It's easy to accuse someone when you don't have to back it up with facts. This is my show, Graham repeated, his voice getting louder. I don't answer to you. I don't have to justify my questions or my methods. If you don't like it, then leave. Oh wait, you already are. How perfectly on brand for you. Harrison walked toward the edge of the set, then stopped and turned back one more time. You know what the saddest part of this is? You actually have a platform. People watch this show. They trust you to have interesting conversations with interesting people. And instead, you use it to tear people down. You could do so much better, but you choose this. Get out, Graham said, pointing toward the exit. Just get out. We don't need you. We never needed you. You're just another aging actor, desperately clinging to relevance. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Some people started to boo, though it wasn't clear if they were booing Harrison or Graham. Harrison just shook his head sadly. I really hope you figure out someday that respect and kindness aren't weaknesses, Harrison said. They're what separate decent people from bullies. I said get out, Graham shouted. Harrison turned and walked off the set without another word. The camera followed him as he moved past the stunned crew members, past the producers who looked like they didn't know whether to stop him or let him go, past the security guards who stepped aside to let him pass. The heavy studio door opened, a rectangle of brightness in the dim space, and then Harrison Ford was gone. Graham stood there on his set, breathing heavily, his face red. The audience sat in shocked silence. Nobody seemed to know what to do or say. One of the cameras kept rolling, capturing Graham as he realized what had just happened, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Well, Graham finally said, trying to regain his composure, trying to find that smooth talk show host voice again. That was unexpected. I suppose we'll need to fill some time now. Maybe we can bring out the next guest early? But his voice sounded hollow. The confidence was gone. The smugness had evaporated. He looked around at his crew, at his audience, and for just a moment, the cameras caught something in his expression. Not quite regret, but close. A flicker of uncertainty. a question forming behind his eyes about whether he had pushed too far this time. Someone in the audience coughed. The sound echoed in the uncomfortable silence. A producer hurried onto the set, whispering urgently in Graham's ear. Graham nodded, not really listening, his eyes still fixed on the door where Harrison had exited. "Let's take a quick break," Graham announced to the audience. "We'll be right back." The lights dimmed slightly. The audience sat frozen, looking at each other, whispering among themselves. People pulled out their phones. The video would be online within minutes. This moment would live forever on the internet. On the set, Graham sat down heavily in his chair. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The bright lights that usually made him look vibrant now just made him look tired and exposed. A makeup artist approached, but he waved them away. "Did anyone see where he went?" Graham asked. "No one in particular." "Out the main entrance," someone replied. "Got in a car and left." Graham nodded slowly. The audience was still whispering. The energy in the room had completely changed. What had started as an exciting night had turned into something else entirely. People felt uncomfortable, like they had witnessed something they shouldn't have. A younger woman in the front row leaned over to her friend. "That was horrible," she whispered. "He just kept attacking him for no reason." "I know," her friend whispered back. "Harrison didn't do anything wrong." More voices joined in. Graham could hear it. He could feel the shift, the way the room had turned against him. These were his people, his audience, the ones who usually laughed at his jokes. But not tonight. The stage manager called out 2 minutes until they were back on air. Graham straightened his jacket, took a sip of water, tried to find that performance energy again, but it wouldn't come. 30 seconds, the stage manager called. Graham looked at the camera. He thought about all the interviews he had done, all the clever remarks. It had always seemed harmless before. Fun. But something about tonight felt different. Something about the way Harrison had looked at him, with disappointment rather than anger, had gotten under his skin. 10 seconds. The audience quieted down. The lights came back up. The cameras went live. Graham put on his smile, that familiar expression. But this time, it felt like a mask. "Welcome back," he said, his voice steady, even though everything inside him felt uncertain. "Let's bring out our next guest. We have a wonderful singer here tonight." The next guest came out, a young pop star with nervous energy. She had probably seen what happened, backstage. Graham could see the caution in her body language as she sat down. "Thank you for being here," Graham said, and for the first time in his career, he actually meant it. He was genuinely grateful someone was willing to sit across from him. "Happy to be here," the pop star said carefully. Graham looked down at his notes, at the questions his writers had prepared, at the witty observations and playful jabs. He looked at them and felt a wave of fatigue. How many times had he done this? How many people had he prodded and pushed for laughs? "So," he began, then stopped. "Let's talk about your new album." The rest of the interview was perfectly fine, perfectly professional, perfectly bland. The pop star talked about her music, and Graham asked polite questions. But something had changed. The sparkle was gone. When the show finally ended, people were still talking about Harrison Ford, about the way Harrison had stayed calm while Graham had gotten aggressive, about how Harrison had refused to play along. In his dressing room, Graham sat in front of the mirror and took off his makeup. His reflection stared back at him. His phone was blowing up with messages. He ignored all of them. Tomorrow, there would be consequences. Tomorrow, there would be meetings. Tomorrow, the internet would have dissected every moment. But tonight, Graham just sat and wondered when exactly entertainment had become something that required humiliating people. He thought about Harrison Ford walking off that set with his head high. He thought about how he had made himself look worse. He thought about all the conversations they could have had. Outside, the studio was emptying. the magic was over. And somewhere out there, Harrison Ford was probably already home, already moving on. Because that's what you do when you have nothing to prove. You walk away. You refuse to engage. The lights went dark. The show was over.